because we do not see through nature on the one hand or through the soul world on the other. The relationship of one soul to the other is really such that a certain boundary is created between two souls, and it is precisely due to our present form of consciousness that this boundary exists. It is indeed a special characteristic attribute of our present form of consciousness that what we are aware of are reflections. This naturally also applies to the interactions between one person and another, because in our present form of consciousness, we have a reflection of consciousness in ourselves. When we approach another person, we cannot do this so blatantly that we pour the content of our own consciousness into his soul. If our consciousness is well developed in a healthy, normal way, it prevents us from coming too close to the consciousness of the other. I could also say that our forces of consciousness and intelligence are organized in such a way that we cannot have too great an influence on others, nor they on us, because, due to the reflection of our consciousnesses, we are separated from each other. This is very significant and something that definitely needs to be borne in mind for an understanding of human development. When a defect occurs somewhere in normal consciousness, then we see immediately how things really stand. Just think of the case of someone whose consciousness is not quite normally developed, who, let us say, has a touch of what in the last weeks, with annoyed but sometimes accurate words, we called mystical or other eccentricities. Let's assume his consciousness has not developed normally and is inclined to all kinds of fantasies that are supported by certain abnormal experiences in his consciousness. Abnormal for our times. You will always notice that abnormal conditions of consciousness of this kind have a far greater effect on other souls than a normal consciousness. A person who, putting it rather crassly, is a bit mad in one direction or another has a far greater influence on those around him than a normal person. And a normal person must protect himself by strengthening his consciousness in order not to be subject to the influence from the abnormal person. An abnormal person, so long as he is not recognized as such, poses a certain danger for those around him because they get influenced too strongly by him, because they too easily start regarding him as something special. Precisely at the point where the mirror of consciousness is somewhat punctured, where consciousness does not see clearly, that is where an influence that is too strong passes through this hole and over to other people. Thus we gain our consciousness in the present phase of our development so that we are placed in the right relationship in the cosmos between human soul and human soul. Now we can say from what I've elucidated for you in the last few days that the following is clear. Here, on the other side of the veil of nature, is the Ahrimanic world with all the beings I have described. Here, on the other side of the veil of the soul world, is the Luciferic world with all the peculiarities I have described for you. The human being is therefore enclosed, as it were, between the Ahrimanic and the Luciferic worlds. If he goes out a little beyond his consciousness towards nature, then there is nothing for it but to become acquainted with the Ahrimanic world. If he goes out beyond himself towards the soul world, then there is nothing for it but to become acquainted with the Luciferic world. For a certain period that is now behind us, people were protected from going too far to one side or the other. But we are living once again in a time of transition, when it cannot be otherwise than that the human soul pushes forward to one side or the other. There is no alternative to this advance to one side or the other taking place. It cannot be done differently. It has to happen. This is required of the human being by the development of our times, for the situation is as follows. As you know, we are living in the developmental phase of the consciousness soul, and are moving towards the development of spirit self. A development of this nature is prepared for long in advance. When this spirit self has been fully developed in the 6th post-Atlantean epoch, then human soul life will in many respects be different from what it is now. Man will live far more objectively. People are already moving towards this more objective life of the intellect. We can see this everywhere. I've characterized this again and again on numerous occasions in my lectures. Humanity is moving towards a soul life, where we can say the intellect will spread like a kind of public power among humanity. Really a kind of public power which people will have to integrate themselves with, like a kind of objective power that functions outside the human soul. We are still living in a time when a large number of people, due to a certain strong development of their individuality, protect themselves from this objective power. But this will become less and less possible the more we approach the sixth post-Atlantean epoch. A time will really come when phenomena that are just beginning will emerge much, much more strongly. If we are in a position to do so, we can already evaluate and reach some accurate conclusions about world events. With regard to this point, we can already observe, for example, how various things are written in various places. We know perfectly well that writers in certain journals are very far from writing only what comes from their own soul. They represent the intelligence of certain circles, an intelligence that proliferates so objectively that the writers are just a mouthpiece for it. It is extraordinarily important that we think about this, because it is a phenomenon that will become increasingly dominant. Now, there is another very important angle to this. When the intelligence of a number of people objectivizes itself, and it has already become objectivized ever since we have had public literature, this gives Ahriman the possibility more and more to take control of human intelligence. This is a perspective that spiritual science has to present to us, for Ahriman, in the most intensive way, is always bent on depriving human beings of their individual reason and on appropriating it to himself, so that human reason is converted to Ahriman's opinion under Ahrimanic power. Ahriman is always trying, as I mentioned with regard to his servants, whose higher forces of intelligence have an occult connection to lower human forces, to appropriate human reason and to prevent people from realizing everything that their reason is capable of. It will become increasingly necessary for people to be aware of moments like these. For it is precisely moments like this that Ahriman uses for his handiwork, where during the day a person who is fully awake becomes dizzy in a certain way, where he falls into a condition of dulled awareness, does not feel quite at home in the physical world, where he begins to give himself up to the circle dance of the universe, where he no longer wants to stand properly as an individual on his own legs and feet. These are moments when one must be wary, for Ahriman's hand is easily strengthened here in our surroundings. The best way to protect ourselves is by endeavoring more and more to develop clear and precise thinking, to think as precisely as possible, and not simply to skip over things in our thinking, as is the usual practice in society today. Don't skim over things, but think clearly. We should even go further than this. We should try more and more to beware of using habitual gangbear phrases and words, because the moment we use habitual words, chosen not from thinking but from habits of speech, even for a short moment, we are thoughtless, and these are particularly dangerous moments because we don't notice them. We should be careful to avoid using words we haven't thought about sufficiently. Anyone who takes the tasks of the age seriously should engage to the highest degree in a self-schooling of this kind, precisely with such intimate things as one's choice of words. And from what I've talked about in these past days, you will easily be able to piece together in your thoughts what is required. Steiner, Rudolf, self-doubt, depression, anxiety disorders, panic and fear. Threshold experiences, crises of the soul, and healing on the anthroposophical path, pp. 1418. Rudolf Steiner, Press, Kindle edition. From a lecture dated 25th October 1915, Dornoch, GA 254, translated by Paul King. Nothing can be reached by discussion with the opponent. There are still many anthroposophists who think that something may be reached by direct discussion with the opponent. Nothing can do us more harm than success in setting forth our truths in the form of discussion. For people do not hate us because we say something that is not true, but because we say the truth. And the more we succeed in proving that we say the truth, the more they will hate us. Of course, this cannot prevent us from stating the truth, but it can prevent us from being so naive as to think that it is possible to progress by discussion. Only positive work enables us to progress. Truth should be represented as strongly as possible, so as to attract as many predestined souls as possible. for these are far more numerous in the present time than is generally assumed. These souls will find the spiritual nourishment needed for the time when no destructive but constructive work will have to be done if human development is to follow an ascending, not a descending curve. Settings. Use appropriate media. Use a male voice for the narrator.